I remember the smell of antiseptic before I remember my name. That chemical sharpness, meant to purify, meant to sterilize, it burned the inside of my nostrils in the selection chamber. I was 19 standard years old. My designation at intake was Candidate 7739 Theta. Before that, I had been someone else. The memory exists as corrupted data now, fragmented. A woman's face. My mother, perhaps. She handed me to the Schola Progenium representatives when I was 6. I do not recall if she wept. The selection chamber held 247 of us. We stood in rows while Medici servitors moved between us with scanning equipment. The floor was polished rockcrete, smooth enough to reflect the overhead lumen strips in warped white streaks. I focused on those reflections because looking at the other candidates required acknowledging what we were about to become. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and fierce sweat, though the temperature held steady at 17 degrees Celsius, too cold for comfort. Deliberate, I learned later. Cold subjects shiver. Shivering reveals physiological weaknesses during the scans. A Chirurgeon master entered through the far archway. I registered his height first, 2.3 meters, accounting for the augmetic elevation in his boots. His face was more mask than flesh, a silver grill covering everything below the eyes. Those eyes were human once. Now they held the flat assessment of someone who has looked at bodies for so long they no longer see people. He moved down our rows without speaking. Occasionally he would stop, reach out with one oversized mechanical hand, and grip a candidate's jaw, turn the head left, right, check the teeth, check the bone structure. He rejected 43 candidates in 11 minutes. They were removed immediately. I never learned where they went. When he reached me, his metal fingers were cold against my face. The pressure was precise, enough to control, not enough to bruise. He studied my features for approximately 7 seconds. Then he moved a brass medallion on a chain from his left hand to his right, marking me as accepted. The medallion was warm from his grip. I still wore it when they began the first procedure. They called the facility Sigma 7. It existed in the underhive levels of a forge world I will not name, either because the information was classified or because my memory of the designation has degraded beyond retrieval. The Chirurgeon master's name was Valen. I learned this not because he introduced himself, but because the servitors repeated it in their limited vocalizations. Master Valen requires, Master Valen orders, Master Valen observes. He had been performing flesh integration procedures for 63 years. His success rate, by his own accounting, was 41%. He described this as acceptable. The first week involved cataloging. They measured everything: height, weight, bone density, muscle composition, blood toxicity tolerance, pain threshold baseline. The pain threshold testing lasted 4 hours. They used electrical stimulation, increasing voltage in controlled increments while monitoring neurological response. I learned that I could withstand 2.7 kilovolt spasms began. I learned that screaming made no difference to the data collection. I learned that the Medici servitors performing the test had been human once, their faces now locked in expressions that might have been concentration or might have been permanent rictus. I could not determine which. Candidate 7739. Theta became subject 47 after cataloging. They shaved my head. They removed my clothing and issued me a gray linen shift that fell to mid-thigh. No fastenings, no pockets. They tattooed the number 47 on my left shoulder blade using a hand punch method that left my back bleeding for 2 days. I was assigned to Dormitory K, bed 12. There were 30 beds in Dormitory K. All of them were occupied. The subject in bed 11 was designated Subject 46. He had been a hive gainer before selection, identified by the scarring across his knuckles and the way he moved, always watching corners, always positioning himself with wolves at his back. He was 22 years old. His hair had been black before they shaved it. I know this because stubble grew back darker than the pale scalp beneath. We did not speak the first night. The rules regarding speech had not been explained, so we defaulted to silence. The second night, after they had taken 3 subjects from our dormitory and returned only 1, Subject 46 leaned across the gap between our beds and whispered, "They're building something." I turned my head to look at him. His eyes were brown, the whites already yellowing from whatever compounds they were introducing into our nutrition paste. He continued, "The ones they take and don't bring back, they're not dead." I heard the servitors talking. They're in integration wing. They're being combined. I did not respond immediately. The concept required processing. Combined. The word carried implications I was not prepared to examine. Finally, I asked, "Combined with what? With who?" They came for me on the 9th day. The orderlies were servitors, but higher function than the scanning units. They could follow complex commands and adjust for resistance. When they gripped my arms, their fingers dug into the muscle hard enough to leave bruises that would last 3 weeks. I know this because I saw those same bruises, faded to yellow-green, in the mirror later, and counted backward. They walked me through corridors I had not seen during the intake process. The walls were bare rockcrete, unpainted, marked at regular intervals with high Gothic script I could not fully read. My education at the Schola had covered basic imperial litanies, but this was technical nomenclature, medical terminology mixed with prayers I did not recognize. Integration wing was colder than the dormitories. 14 degrees. My breath misted. The shift they had given me offered no thermal protection. The orderlies brought me to preparation chamber 3 and placed me on a steel table. The surface was not flat but contoured, designed to hold a human body in a specific position, supine, arms slightly spread, legs together. Restraints emerged from recessed channels in the table, clamping across my wrists, biceps, chest, hips, thighs, and ankles. The pressure was uniform. Escape was mechanically impossible. Master Valen entered 7 minutes later. I had learned to track time by counting my heartbeats, 73 per minute at rest, faster under stress. He was accompanied by 2 flesh servitors and a figure I had not seen before. An apothecary in power armor painted the white and red of the Hospitaliers. The apothecary's helmet was mag-locked to his belt, revealing a face that was younger than I expected. He might have been 30. His eyes moved across me with the same assessment I had seen in Valen's gaze, but there was something else beneath it. Curiosity, perhaps, or hunger. Subject 47, Valen said, consulting a data slate held in his oversized mechanical hand. Bone structure is optimal. Genetic markers indicate favorable compatibility with xenogenic tissue. Pain threshold is within acceptable range. He looked up from the slate to address the apothecary. This one should survive the first integration. Probability, 68%. The apothecary nodded. Begin with dermal grafting. If the rejection cascade can be managed at the surface level, we can proceed to deeper layers. I did not understand what this meant. Within the hour, I would understand completely. They started with my left forearm. Valen produced a device that resembled a scalpel, but emitted a thin beam of lass energy. He drew a line from my wrist to my elbow, cutting through the dermis in a single smooth motion. I felt the heat before the pain. The lass cauterized as it cut, so there was no blood immediately, just the smell of my own flesh burning, a sweet, greasy odor that mixed with the antiseptic and created something worse than either component alone. The pain arrived 3 seconds later. My neurological system processed the trauma and transmitted the signal. Damage, violation, wrongness. I did not scream. I had learned during the threshold testing that screaming was irrelevant. Valen peeled the skin back from the underlying muscle with practiced efficiency. He used small clamps to hold the edges away from the wound site, creating a neat rectangular window approximately 15 centimeters long and 8 centimeters wide. The exposed muscle glistened under the lumen light, dark red, pulsing slightly with my heartbeat. He swabbed it with more antiseptic. The chemical contact with raw tissue produced a new tier of pain. I logged it as distinct from the cutting pain, sharper, more diffuse. One of the flesh servitors approached carrying a stasis container. Frost clung to its exterior. Valen opened it and removed a section of skin that did not match my flesh tone. It was darker, almost gray, and the texture was wrong, too smooth, lacking the fine lines and imperfections of human dermis. He laid it across the exposed muscle of my forearm and began attaching it with a device that fired microscopic staples faster than I could track. The staples bit through the foreign skin and into my own flesh beneath, anchoring it in place. Each staple produced a small, distinct point of pain. There were approximately 200 staples. I counted them by sensation since I could not see past Valen's bulk. Xenogenic tissue from a crude specimen, the apothecary observed, leaning closer. Interesting choice. Their regenerative factors might mitigate rejection. If the subject's immune system does not destroy the graft first, Valen replied. He finished stapling and stepped back to observe his work. We will know within 6 hours. They did not return me to the dormitory. I remained in preparation chamber 3, still restrained to the table, while my body began to process what had been done to it. The foreign skin on my forearm felt wrong immediately. Not painful in the way the cutting had been painful, but wrong in a deeper, more fundamental sense. It was too tight. It did not move correctly. Beneath it, I could feel my immune system beginning to respond. My forearm grew hot. Swelling started within 20 minutes. By the first hour, my skin, both the original flesh at the edges and the crude tissue in the center, was radiating heat I could feel in the air above it. By hour 3, I was experiencing systemic fever, 38.6 degrees Celsius. My pulse had elevated to 109 beats per minute. I was sweating despite the chamber's cold. The restraints prevented me from shivering properly, so my muscles contracted in irregular spasms that burned through what little energy reserves I had. Nausea arrived at hour 4. I vomited twice, but the restraints held my head in place, so the bile pooled in my mouth until I managed to turn my face to the side and let it drain onto the table. No one came to clean it. Hour 6. Valen returned with the apothecary. They studied my forearm without speaking for 90 seconds. The swelling had progressed. My entire forearm was now distended. The skin, both human and Xenos, stretched taut. The color had shifted to a mottled purple-red. Valen pressed one metal finger against the graft. I felt the pressure as distant, filtered through layers of inflamed tissue. When he removed his finger, the indentation remained for several seconds before slowly filling in. Severe inflammatory response, he noted, but the graft has not necrosed. The tissue remains viable. Will the subject survive rejection cascade? The apothecary asked. Valen considered this. Probability is now 42%, reduced from initial estimate. However, the data collected thus far is valuable regardless of outcome. They injected me with something. I felt the needle enter the crook of my right elbow, the arm without the graft. The compound was cold going in, creating a sensation of ice spreading through my vascular system. My fever began to drop within minutes. The inflammation in my forearm remained, but the systemic response decreased. My pulse slowed to 94. The nausea receded enough that I could breathe without triggering the urge to vomit. Immunosuppressant cocktail, Valen explained, though I had not asked. We are forcing your body to accept what it wants to reject. This is the foundation of flesh weaving. Compatibility is not discovered, it is imposed. I remained in preparation chamber 3 for 4 more days. They fed me through an intravenous line, bypassing my digestive system entirely. The compound they used had a chemical taste that reached my mouth despite never passing through it, metallic, bitter, clinging to the back of my throat. I received immunosuppressant injections every 8 hours. My forearm slowly stabilized. The swelling decreased. The color shifted from purple-red to something closer to normal, though the crude skin remained distinctly darker and smoother than my original flesh. On the 5th day, Valen removed the staples. The foreign skin had integrated enough to remain in place without mechanical support. He ran tests, tactile sensitivity, motor control, temperature differentiation. I could feel his touches through the graft, though the sensation was muted, as if processed through insulation. I could move my fingers, but the grafted skin pulled uncomfortably with certain motions. When he held a heated stylus near the Xeno's tissue, I felt the warmth but could not accurately gauge the temperature. My native skin would have told me precisely how hot the object was. The graft could only report hot, closer, too close. Functional integration, Valen declared. The subject has achieved baseline compatibility. We will proceed to Phase 2. They returned me to Dormitory K. Subject 46 stared at my forearm when I was placed back in bed 12. His expression held recognition and horror in equal measure. The other subjects looked away. I understood why. I was proof of what waited for them. That night, Subject 46 whispered, "Does it hurt?" The grafted skin did not hurt in the conventional sense, but it felt wrong constantly. Every moment, a wrongness that my brain could not stop processing, like tinnitus, but located in my flesh instead of my ears. "Yes," I told him, "but not the way you think." He was silent for 11 seconds. Then, "What are they making us into?" I did not have an answer. Not then. Phase 2 began 6 days after my return to Dormitory K. They came for Subject 46 and me together. The orderlies placed us in adjacent preparation chambers, 5 and 6, separated by a wall thin enough that I could hear the sounds from his room. Metal instruments on steel trays, the hum of medical equipment cycling through diagnostic patterns. His breathing, controlled at first, then faster as they secured his restraints. I did not see what they did to him that first session. I was occupied with my own procedure. Valen arrived with 2 new Chirurgeons I had not encountered before. Younger men, apprentices perhaps, who worked with the nervous precision of those still learning their craft. They studied my forearm graft, documenting its integration with vid capture equipment and tactile measurement devices. One of them pressed a scanner against the crude skin and nodded at whatever readings it provided. Subject 47 demonstrates stable xenogenic integration, he reported to Valen. Minimal rejection scarring, immune suppression protocols remain effective. Valen examined my arm himself, turning it beneath the lumen light to observe from multiple angles. His mechanical fingers were gentler than during the initial procedure, almost careful. "We will expand the integration site," he decided. "Full dermal replacement on the left arm, shoulder to fingertips. If tolerance holds, we proceed to the right arm within 3 weeks." They cut the rest of my left arm open in sections. Shoulder, upper arm, elbow, forearm again, extending the original graft. Hand. Each section was excised with the last scalpel. The skin peeled back and discarded into medical waste containers. I watched them dispose of pieces of myself, as if I were raw material being processed for reclamation. The pain was immense but familiar now. I had learned its language during the first graft. My brain categorized and filed each new sensation. Cutting heat, exposed tissue, chemical burn of antiseptic, staple puncture multiplied by thousands. The replacement skin came from multiple sources. I could identify at least 3 different textures being grafted onto my arm. The crude dermis I already carried, something rougher that might have been orc hide, and patches of what appeared to be human skin but was colored wrong, too pale, almost translucent. Valen worked with the efficiency of long practice, attaching, stapling, sealing. When he finished, my left arm was a patchwork. The colors did not match. The textures created visible boundaries where one graft met another. I looked at it and could not recognize it as mine. In the adjacent chamber, Subject 46 began screaming. The sound cut through the thin wall with clarity that suggested intentional acoustic design. They wanted us to hear each other. His screams held a quality I had not heard in the threshold testing chambers. This was not pain response to electrical stimulation. This was biological horror, the sound of a body being forced into configurations it was never meant to occupy. The screaming continued for 9 minutes, then it stopped abruptly, mid-breath, and did not resume. I did not see Subject 46 for 3 days after that procedure. When they finally returned him to Dormitory K, I almost did not recognize him. His chest had been opened, not surgically, precisely, opened like a cabinet, with metal hinges installed along his sternum and mechanical latches holding his ribcage closed. Through the semi-transparent synthetic membrane that covered the opening, I could see his organs, lungs expanding and contracting, heart beating visibly, additional components that were not human, machinery integrated directly into his chest cavity, pulsing with their own rhythms. He was awake, conscious. The chirurgeons had not sedated him during the installation, and his eyes held the fractured quality of someone who has witnessed their own vivisection. He was placed in bed 11 with the same mechanical indifference the orderlies showed all subjects. They did not adjust him for comfort. They simply positioned him supine and departed. I waited until the lumen strips dimmed to night cycle. Then I leaned toward his bed and whispered, "Can you speak?" His eyes moved to me. His mouth opened. At first, no sound emerged. Then, slowly, as if his vocal cords had to remember their function, "I can speak. I can feel. I can see myself from the inside now. They installed something. I do not know what it does, but I feel it working." Does it hurt? He considered this with the same careful analysis I had used when he asked me the same question. It hurts, but also it feels necessary, like thirst, like breathing. My body knows it needs this thing they put inside me, even though I never needed it before. They are rewriting what I am at a level below thought. But something had changed between us. We were no longer simply subjects 46 and 47, sequential numbers in a processing queue. We were witnesses to each other's dismantling. That created connection despite our attempts to remain separate. Over the following weeks, they continued working on both of us. My right arm received the same treatment as my left, full dermal replacement with multiple xenogenic sources. The integration process improved. My body was learning to accept foreign tissue, or perhaps the immunosuppressants had accumulated to sufficient levels that rejection was no longer possible. Either way, my arms became patchworks of textures and colors that moved incorrectly, pulled too tight in some places, and hung loose in others. Subject 46's chest modification was only the beginning. They opened his abdomen next, installing additional components whose function I could not determine. Tubes ran between his organic organs and mechanical additions, carrying fluids that were not quite blood. His skin took on a grayish pallor from the chemical cocktails they were using to prevent his body from destroying itself. He lost weight rapidly, 14 kilograms in 3 weeks. The muscles in his face drew tight against his skull. His eyes sank deeper into their sockets. We talked during the night cycles, quiet conversations conducted in whispers while the other subjects pretended to sleep. He told me about the underhive where he had grown up, a section of the Forge world called the Rust Warren where gangs fought over water recycling stations and protein synthesizers. He described a firefight where he had killed 3 men with a stub pistol he had assembled from scavenged parts. He told me this without pride or shame, just statement of fact. I was good at surviving, he said. That is why they selected me. They do not want subjects who will die easily. They want subjects who will cling to life while they transform us into something else. I told him about the Schola Progenium, though my memories of that time were fragmenting. I remembered drill instructors whose faces I could no longer retrieve. I remembered sitting in a lecture hall while a minister and priest explained the necessity of service, the glory of sacrifice, the Emperor's eternal watch. The words had made sense then. Now they seemed like sounds without meaning, ritual phrases designed to make us compliant. I told Subject 46 this, and he nodded. They are doing the same thing to our bodies that they did to our minds, he observed, replacing the original with something that serves their purpose. You did not question when they told you service was glorious. Soon, you will not question when they tell you that you are no longer human. 4 weeks after his chest was opened, Subject 46 developed complications. I woke during night cycle to the sound of his breathing. Rapid, shallow, wrong. I leaned over and saw that the synthetic membrane covering his chest cavity had clouded. Behind it, his organs were moving incorrectly. His heart was beating too fast, arrhythmic. The mechanical components were pulsing at a different rhythm, out of sync with his biology. He was awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to look away from what was happening inside him. "Get the Medicae," I said to the darkness. No response. The dormitory surveillance servitors recorded, but did not intervene. I called out again, louder. Still nothing. Subject 46's hand found mine across the gap between beds. His grip was weak, trembling. His pulse was visible in his wrist, 140 beats per minute, climbing. "Do not watch," he whispered. "When it happens, do not watch." When what happens? His grip tightened fractionally. "When they take me to Integration Wing, and do not bring me back. Do not try to remember my face. Do not try to hold on to me. That is how they win. They make you care, and then they use that caring as another wound. Let me go. Forget me. It will be easier." I did not promise him this. I could not. Instead, I held his hand and watched his chest cavity betray him. His heart found a rhythm again, slower than it should be, but steady. The mechanical components adjusted to match it. The crisis passed. He survived that night, but we both understood what had almost occurred, and we both knew it would occur eventually. They came for him 7 days later. The orderlies arrived during day cycle, which was unusual. Removals typically occurred at night. They released the restraints holding Subject 46 to his bed and lifted him with the mechanical strength servitors possessed. He did not resist. As they carried him past my bed toward the dormitory exit, his eyes met mine. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The metal doors closed behind him with a sound like finality. He did not return that night, or the next. His bed remained empty. On the 3rd day, they brought a new subject to Dormitory K and assigned him to Bed 11. The new subject was younger than the rest of us, 17 perhaps. His eyes held the same terror I had carried during intake. He looked at my patchwork arms and whatever expression crossed my face, because he immediately looked away and did not look at me again. I did not ask about Subject 46. I knew the orderlies would not answer, and I knew that asking would accomplish nothing except demonstrating that I still cared about individual losses. I was learning that the Imperium's greatest efficiency came from making care itself into a liability. 6 days after Subject 46's removal, Valen summoned me to a chamber I had not seen before. Not a preparation room. Something deeper in the facility. The orderlies walked me through corridors that descended, the temperature dropping half a degree every 100 meters. We reached a level where the walls were bare metal instead of rockcrete, and the air tasted of preservative chemicals. Valen waited in a chamber that held 12 surgical tables. 11 of them were occupied. The subjects on those tables were not restrained because they were not struggling. They were not struggling because they were no longer individual subjects. Their bodies had been opened and connected to each other through tubes and cables and sections of transplanted tissue. I could trace the flow of blood from one subject's heart through external tubing into another subject's circulatory system. I could see lungs that breathed for multiple bodies. I could observe a single spinal column that branched into neural connections, serving 3 separate heads. Subject 46 was the central node of this configuration. His chest cavity had been expanded. The rib cage splayed open and locked in position with metal struts. His heart was twice the size I remembered, augmented with mechanical pumps that forced blood through the network of connected bodies. His face was still recognizable, but his eyes were open and empty, not dead, active. Processing. He was awake inside this construction, conscious, experiencing everything. Subject 47, Valen said, his voice carrying the tone of someone presenting completed work. Observe the multi-substrate integration platform. 11 subjects merged into a single functional organism, each contributing their biological capacity to the collective system. Subject 46 serves as the primary neural hub. His consciousness coordinates the network's functions. I looked at Subject 46's eyes. They moved. They tracked to me. Recognition flared behind them, followed immediately by something that might have been pleading, or might have been the desire for me to forget him as he had requested. I could not determine which. Why? My voice emerged steadier than I expected. Valen tilted his head, confused by the question. The Imperium requires soldiers who can survive injuries that would kill ordinary men. We are developing integrated combat platforms where damage to individual components does not compromise the whole. If one heart fails, 5 others continue pumping. If one set of lungs collapses, 3 others maintain oxygenation. This configuration can sustain function with up to 73% component loss. It is magnificent. He is still conscious. Yes, consciousness is necessary for neural integration. The network requires active coordination. Subject 46's brain processes input from 11 bodies simultaneously. The cognitive load is considerable, but he continues to function. Truly looked. Subject 46's mouth moved slightly, forming words he could not speak because his lungs were breathing for others now. The air diverted before reaching his vocal cords. But I could read the shape his lips made. The same words, over and over. Forget me, forget me, forget me. Subject 47 will join the network. Valen continued. Your xenogenic integrations make you an ideal candidate for cross-species tissue adaptation. We will connect you to the platform as the 12th node, introducing non-human dermal and subdermal systems throughout the collective. The data from this integration will inform. This was an act of will I had not known I still possessed. No. Valen stopped speaking. He regarded me with the flat assessment of someone observing a tool malfunction. The statement is not comprehensible. Subjects do not refuse procedures. I refuse. One of the flesh servitors moved toward me. I did not resist when it gripped my arm. I had no capacity to resist a servitor's hydraulic strength. But I maintained eye contact with Valen and repeated, I refuse. He studied me for 19 seconds. Then he consulted his data slate, scrolling through information I could not see. Subject 47 demonstrates elevated stress response and compromised compliance conditioning. Integration at this time would introduce psychological instability into the network. He looked up from the slate. Return Subject 47 to dormitory. Schedule for reconditioning protocol. Defer network integration for 3 weeks. The orderlies collected me and walked me back through the descending corridors. I did not look back at Subject 46. I had learned what he wanted me to learn, that caring was weaponized in this place, and that the kindest thing I could do was become incapable of it. The reconditioning protocol lasted 11 days. They placed me in an isolation chamber 3 meters by 3 meters by 2.4 meters high. No bed, no waste reclamation. A single lumen strip that never dimmed. They fed me through a slot in the door. Nutrient paste at intervals I could not predict, ensuring I could not develop a sense of time's passage. The temperature held at 9 degrees Celsius. Too cold to sleep properly. Cold enough that my body burned calories constantly trying to maintain core temperature. For the first 2 days I paced. Counted steps, counted breaths, maintained structure through measurement. By day 3, the measurements became unreliable. I lost count. I started over. Lost count again. The numbers became arbitrary sounds I repeated without meaning. By day 5, I stopped moving. I sat in the corner farthest from the door and stared at the wall. The wall was grey metal, unmarked, reflecting nothing. I stared at it and thought about Subject 46's mouth, forming words his lungs could not voice. I thought about his consciousness distributed across 11 bodies, experiencing pain in locations his brain had never mapped before. I thought about how he had asked me to forget him, and how I could not, and how that inability was exactly what they wanted. The isolation taught me what consciousness does when deprived of input. It turns inward. It begins consuming itself. Memories become suspect. Did that conversation with Subject 46 actually occur? Or have I imagined it in this grey room? Did I truly have a mother's face in my memory? Or is that a constructed image my brain generated to maintain narrative continuity? Without external reference points, internal experience becomes unverifiable. By day 8, I had conversations with Subject 46. He was not present in the cell, but I could hear his voice with the clarity of hallucination. He told me about the Rust Warren again, but this time the details were different, contradictory. He described firefights in locations he had never mentioned before. He told me his designation before Subject 46, a name I cannot retrieve now because I do not know if he actually told me or if I invented it to fill the silence. By day 10, I understood what they were doing. The isolation was not punishment. It was surgery performed on consciousness itself. They were cutting away my attachment to individual identity, to specific memories, to the connections that made me human. When they finally opened the door and returned me to Dormitory K, I was lighter, emptier, easier to fill with purpose. They brought me back to the integration chamber 12 days after my isolation ended. Subject 46 was still there, still alive, still serving as the network's central node. His eyes tracked to me when I entered, and I saw the question behind them. Did you forget? Are you free? I had not forgotten. But something had broken during isolation. The part of me that would have refused again was no longer accessible. When Valen gestured to the empty 12th table, I walked to it without resistance. When the restraints closed over my wrists and ankles, I did not struggle. When Valen produced the last scalpel and drew the first cutting line across my chest, I registered the pain as data and did not scream. They opened me efficiently. My ribcage separated along the lines Valen had planned, exposing my heart, my lungs, my liver. They installed tubes that connected to Subject 46's circulation. They attached neural cables to my spinal column at the base of my skull. They integrated my xenogenic skin grafts into the network's dermal system, spreading non-human tissue across multiple bodies through surgical channels I could not see but could feel being opened. The moment they activated the neural connection, I stopped being Subject 47. I became part of the collective. My consciousness expanded into 11 other bodies. No, 12 bodies total, mine included. I felt Subject 46's heart beating as if it were my own. I felt the lungs of Subject 2009 pulling air through my chest. I experienced pain in limbs I did not possess, pleasure centers firing in brains that were not mine. The sensory overload was total. I tried to scream, but my voice merged with 10 other voices screaming simultaneously, and the sound became a collective wail that resonated through the network. Subject 46 was there in the shared consciousness. I felt him trying to maintain individual thought while processing the network's needs. He was drowning in data, his sense of self fragmenting under the weight of 12 bodies' worth of input. But he recognized me. Recognized the consciousness that had been Subject 47, and through the chaos of shared sensation, he communicated a single concept. I am sorry. I understood. He was sorry that I had not forgotten, sorry that I had ended here, sorry that we were both trapped in this merged existence where death would be relief, but would not come. The network functioned for 6 hours. Valen and the apothecary monitored from outside our shared consciousness, measuring blood pressure across 12 circulatory systems, tracking neural activity in multiple brains, documenting the xenogenic tissue's integration into the collective dermal layer. They spoke to each other in technical language I could hear through 12 sets of ears. Stable integration, minimal rejection cascade, cognitive coherence maintained despite distributed processing. Then Subject 29's heart failed. I felt it stop. We all felt it. The sudden absence of its rhythm created a gap in the network's synchronization. Subject 46's augmented heart compensated, pumping harder to maintain pressure through the tubes that had been carrying Subject 29's blood. My heart rate elevated. 8 other hearts adjusted their rhythms. The network staggered but continued functioning. Subject 29's brain, deprived of adequate oxygen despite the shared lung capacity, began to die. I experienced his death from inside his consciousness. The fear was immediate and total, followed by confusion as higher functions shut down, followed by a strange peace as his awareness dissolved into nothing. His body remained connected to the network, heart dead but sustained by our collective circulation. A corpse kept technically alive by 11 other people's biology. Valen noted this without concern. Component failure within acceptable parameters. Network maintains function. Continue observation. Over the next 2 hours, 3 more subjects died. Not catastrophically. No sudden cessation. Just gradual failure as the strain of supporting the network exceeded their biological capacity. Each death I experienced as partial suicide, feeling consciousness wink out while remaining aware through the other bodies still functioning. By hour 8, the network had lost 5 components. 7 of us remained alive, struggling to support the increased load. Valen finally ordered disconnection. Viable data collected. Platform survival rate insufficient for deployment. Terminate experiment. They began cutting us apart. Not carefully, the network was failed research now, no longer requiring preservation. They severed tubes without proper clamping, allowing blood to spill across the surgical tables. They disconnected neural cables with mechanical efficiency. Each disconnection I felt as amputation, losing access to bodies that had become temporary extensions of myself. When they separated me from Subject 46, our shared consciousness broke along that neural divide, and I felt him fall away into isolation within his own expanded system. His final communication through the network was not words but sensation. Relief mixed with loss, gratitude that I would escape mixed with despair that he would not. They returned me to Dormitory K with my chest still open, held closed by the same synthetic membrane Subject 46 had worn. Through it, I could see the modifications they had made to my internal organs. My heart was larger now, augmented with small mechanical components that pulsed in rhythm with the organic muscle. My lungs had been altered. I could not determine how, but they moved differently, pulled air with greater efficiency. I was no longer entirely human. I was no longer entirely individual. Part of me remained in that integration chamber, connected to Subject 46's consciousness even though the physical link was severed. I did not see Subject 46 again. I learned later, weeks later, that he survived the network's disconnection. The Chirurgeon master kept him alive, maintained him as a test platform for additional integrations. They continued adding subjects to his system, replacing the bodies that failed, expanding his consciousness across more and more nodes until he was no longer one person experiencing 12 bodies, but a distributed intelligence inhabiting 67 connected components simultaneously. By then, I had stopped thinking of him as Subject 46. By then, I had learned to stop thinking about individuals entirely. They continued working on me. My legs received the same xenogenic treatment as my arms, full dermal replacement with layered grafts from multiple species. My back was opened and reinforced with synthetic vertebrae that interfaced with my nervous system. My skull was modified, plates of bone removed and replaced with transparent polymer that allowed direct observation of my brain tissue. I could no longer see myself without witnessing my own interior. When I looked down at my hands, I saw through the translucent crude skin to the muscles and tendons working beneath. Other subjects came to Dormitory K. They stared at me the way I had once stared at Subject 46. I became the proof of what they would become. I learned not to speak to them. Connection served no purpose except to create future wounds. Better to exist as example, as warning, as inevitable future they would each reach in sequence. Subject 142 almost mattered. He arrived 6 months after Subject 46's removal, though my time measurement by this point was approximate at best. Subject 142 was older than most intake candidates, 31 years old, a former Planetary Defense Force soldier who had survived 12 years of active combat before selection. He carried scars from last fire across his back, visible during the communal decontamination cycles. He did not speak unnecessarily. He observed with the tactical assessment of someone trained to evaluate threats. When they placed him in bed 11, Subject 46's old position, I felt something attempt to surface in my consciousness. Recognition of pattern. Awareness that I was about to repeat the cycle that had destroyed me. I suppressed this. Subject 142 was not Subject 46. Attachment was tactical error. But during the night cycles he talked, not to me specifically, to the darkness, processing his observations aloud. He described the integration procedures he witnessed, analyzed the Chirurgeon master's techniques, speculated about the purpose behind the modifications. His analytical framework was military. He saw us as weapons being manufactured, evaluated our effectiveness against theoretical deployment scenarios. They are building infiltrators, he said one night, subjects who can pass as xeno-species due to integrated tissue. Or perhaps they are testing compatibility for Astartes enhancement. The Imperium has lost so many chapters. Maybe they are trying to rebuild the legions with whatever genetic material remains available, even if it comes from xeno sources. I listened without responding. His theories were logical but irrelevant. The why of our transformation mattered less than the fact of it. Subject 142 received his first major modification on his 4th week. They opened his throat and installed a secondary respiratory system. Xenos-derived, possibly Tau technology, though I could not confirm. The installation left him unable to speak for 6 days while the tissue integrated. When he finally recovered vocal capacity, his voice emerged with a mechanical undertone, processed through both human and artificial vocal cords simultaneously. "I sound like a servitor," he said, testing the new voice. There was no horror in his tone, just observation. 3 weeks later, they integrated him into a temporary network, not Subject 46's platform, but a smaller configuration designed to test rapid integration and disconnection protocols. Subject 142 and 4 others linked for 72 hours, then separated. He returned to Dormitory K afterwards and did not speak for 5 days. When he finally did, it was to ask me a question I had not expected. "How long have you been here?" I calculated. Months had blurred into undifferentiated time, but I could count procedures, track my own transformations, estimate duration. 17 months, approximately. "Do you remember who you were before?" I examined my memory. The woman's face, my mother supposedly, was no longer accessible as clear image. The Schola Progenium existed as concept without specific recall. My designation before Subject 47 was corrupted data. "No," I told him. "I remember that I had a before, but the details are gone." Subject 142 nodded slowly. "They are taking that from me now. I can feel it happening. The network integration, when I was connected to those other subjects, I experienced their memories as if they were mine. Now I cannot determine which memories belong to me and which belong to someone else. I remember a wife, but I was never married. I remember dying in combat, but I am alive. The data is corrupting." This was the moment I should have maintained distance, should have offered no connection. Instead, I heard myself say, "It continues. The corruption accelerates. Eventually, you will exist only in present tense. Past becomes irrelevant. Future becomes impossible to conceptualize. There is only function. How do you bear it?" I did not have an answer that would help him. The truth was that I bore it by not bearing it, by allowing the parts of me that could suffer to degrade until only the parts that could function remained. But Subject 142 had not reached that state yet. He was still searching for meaning, still trying to maintain the soldier's need for purpose and mission clarity. Subject 142 died 4 weeks later, not during a procedure, Between them, his body, strained by multiple integrations and forced to accept conflicting biological imperatives, simply failed. His augmented heart stopped during night cycle. I woke to the sound of his final breath, a rattling exhale that did not find a matching inhale. The servitors came and removed him without ceremony. By morning, a new subject occupied bed 11. I felt Subject 142's death as confirmation rather than loss. He had almost mattered. I had almost allowed connection to form. His death demonstrated the wisdom of my learned detachment. The system consumed everyone. Caring only meant experiencing that consumption more acutely. They brought 17 more subjects to bed 11 over the following year. I learned all their designations. I forgot all their designations. They blurred into a sequence of bodies occupying the same space, each one temporary, each one replaced. Some survived long enough to receive significant modifications. Most did not. The turnover rate was approximately 67%. Only 1 in 3 subjects survived beyond the initial integration phases. I survived because I had learned to survive. My body had been rebuilt so many times that rejection cascades no longer occurred. My immune system had been suppressed into non-existence or trained into acceptance. I could not determine which. I carried tissue from at least 11 different species integrated into my dermal, muscular, and skeletal systems. My organs were a mix of human, xenos, and mechanical components. My consciousness was distributed across enough automatic neural nodes that I no longer experienced thought as singular process, but as parallel processing streams that converged into something resembling individual awareness. Valen called me his success case. Subject 47 demonstrates unprecedented compatibility with multi-source integration, he told the apothecary during one observation session. Neurological coherence maintained despite extensive modification. Physical capability enhanced beyond baseline human by a factor of 2.7. Viable for deployment in specialized infiltration or combat support roles. I processed this assessment without reaction. Deployment meant purpose. Purpose meant the transformation had achieved its goal. I should have felt pride or relief or something. Instead, I felt nothing. I had become exactly what they intended, a functional platform for whatever tissue or technology they chose to integrate, a body without resistance, a consciousness without objection. They placed me in long-term storage after Valen's assessment. Not termination, storage. A chamber 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, held at 4 degrees Celsius to slow metabolic processes. Minimal nutrition delivered intravenously. No lumen light. No sound. Just existence reduced to its most minimal state while they decided how to deploy me. I remained in storage for what I later calculated as 9 months. During this time, I existed without external input. My consciousness, deprived of sensory data, began processing its own archives. I relived procedures. I experienced Subject 46's death in the network repeatedly, each replay slightly different as my memory corrupted and reconstructed the event. I held conversations with subjects whose faces I could no longer visualize. I counted my heartbeats, augmented and biological pumping in complex rhythms, until the numbers lost meaning. In the darkness of storage, I understood what I had become. Not human, not xenos, not machine. Something assembled from all three, held together by surgical precision and chemical suppression and the institutional hunger that consumed individuals and produced tools. I was proof that the Imperium could take anything, any body, any consciousness, any biological material regardless of origin, and convert it into function. The Emperor protects, they had told us in the Schola. But protection was never the point. The point was perpetuation. The system sustained itself by consuming those who believed in it, processing them into components that would consume the next generation. Subject 46 had understood this. He had tried to warn me, but I had not forgotten him, and that failure to forget had led me exactly where he knew it would, into the same machinery converted into the same function. When they finally removed me from storage, I had been in darkness for 273 days. The lumen light of the extraction chamber burned my eyes despite the polymer skull plates that were supposed to protect my vision. Orderlies washed me, decontaminated the storage chamber's residue from my patchwork skin, ran diagnostic scans to ensure my systems remained functional. I was weighed, 80 to 9 kilocombs down from my intake weight of 73 kilograms, despite the added augmetics. Muscle density had increased, bone structure reinforced. I was heavier and more hollow simultaneously. Valen was no longer at Sigma 7. A new Chirurgeon master had assumed control, a woman this time, which violated the absolute prohibition but existed in my memory and therefore must be corrected. A younger male Chirurgeon whose name I did not learn. He reviewed my records with the assessment of someone inheriting a predecessor's work. Extensive integration, he noted. Viable for field deployment, transfer to Departamento Monitorum for assignment. They shipped me off-world 3 days later. I was placed in a transport container with 17 other enhanced subjects, all of us modified beyond recognition of our original forms. We did not speak during transit. We existed in the container's darkness, each processing our own corrupted memories, each waiting for whatever deployment the Imperium required. I never learned what happened to Subject 46. His network might still exist somewhere in Sigma 7's depths, expanded to hundreds of connected bodies. His consciousness spread so thin across so many nodes that individual awareness has dissolved entirely. Or perhaps the platform failed, and he was finally allowed to die. I will never know. The Imperium does not provide closure. It only provides function. I exist now as I existed then, modified, integrated, functional. I have been deployed 7 times to theaters I cannot name, performing infiltration and combat support roles my original human form could never have survived. I have killed with hands that are no longer entirely human. I have infiltrated Xenos populations using tissue that was harvested from their dead. I have served the Emperor's Imperium with a body that proves his domain extends even into the biological material of his enemies. I do not dream anymore. The neural augmetics process memory during rest cycles with mechanical efficiency that prevents the formation of dreams. But sometimes, in the moments between waking and function, I remember Subject 46's mouth forming words, "Forget me." And I understand that I never will, because that memory is the only proof I have that I was once human enough to care. The Imperium consumes. This is not revelation. This is not complaint. This is testament. I was consumed. I became part of the machinery that consumes others. The system perpetuates through those it destroys, making victims into instruments, making suffering into fuel. The only mercy it offers is the gradual degradation of the parts of you that could recognize this as horror. I still remember my mother's face, sometimes. The memory is corrupted now, overlaid with the faces of the subjects who occupied Bed 11. Mixed with images my neural augmetics generated to fill data gaps. But the core of it remains, a woman who handed her child to the Imperium's representatives and walked away. She knew. Everyone knows we are raw material. We have always been raw material. The Imperium protects. The phrase still echoes in my augmented consciousness, recorded during the Schola Progenium lectures, preserved in my archives despite all the corruption. The Imperium protects, not its people, not its subjects, not the bodies it processes in facilities like Sigma 7. The Imperium protects itself, through consumption, through conversion, through the systematic transformation of everything it touches into tools that will perpetuate its eternal hunger. I am Subject 47. I am whatever designation they assigned me after deployment. I am the patchwork body carrying tissue from 11 species. I am the consciousness that witnessed Subject 46's dissolution. I am proof that the Imperium can make you into anything and will make you into everything except free. This is my testimony. I give it because giving testimony is all that remains. Because somewhere in a facility I cannot name, there are new subjects being selected, catalogued, opened, modified. They will be told they serve a greater purpose. They will believe this until the last scalpel draws its first cutting line. They will resist until resistance becomes impossible. They will forget who they were until memory itself is stripped away and replaced with function. Subject 46 asked me to forget him. I could not. That inability is the last human thing I carry. When it finally corrupts beyond retrieval, when the neural augmetics finally overwrite the memory with more useful data, I will be complete. I will be exactly what they made me, a tool without history, a weapon without conscience, a body without the burden of remembering what it used to be. Until then, I continue. I function. I serve. I kill when commanded. I infiltrate when deployed. I survive because surviving is what I was built to do. And in the spaces between missions, in the darkness before the next deployment, I remember a subject in bed 11 whose mouth formed words his lungs could not voice. And I carry that memory like the last piece of ballast, preventing me from floating completely away into the system's endless hunger. The Emperor protects. The Imperium consumes. These are not contradictions. They are the same truth spoken in different languages. I have been protected by being consumed. I have been transformed by being destroyed. I exist now in the eternal present of the tool that has forgotten it was once made, experiencing function as identity, purpose as self. This is what flesh-weaving creates, not soldiers, not weapons, not even servitors. Something worse. Subjects who remain conscious through every stage of their conversion, who witness their own systematic dismantling, who survive long enough to become part of the machinery that will dismantle others. I remember antiseptic burning my nostrils in the selection chamber, 19 years old. Candidate 7739, Thaker. The smell is still archived somewhere in my augmented consciousness, preserved as the last sensory memory from before I understood what I would become. Now, I understand completely, and I continue.